So you could probably accuse me of maybe, you know, overthinking guitar amplifiers. I mean, my channel is probably, unlike most guitar-based channels, it's really become somewhat of an amp-based channel as much as a guitar-based channel, if not more so. I really love amps. To me, it's where the sound comes from. So when a couple of weeks ago I put out a video which was one guitar and 11 amps with a pedal, and it did, you know, really well for my channel, I was really pleased about that because that's something I can enjoy putting together. Now, I spent the last day filming this particular one, and I'm really excited for you guys to hear what I've been hearing in the room. Now, with this one today, we're looking at 12 different amps, and we're looking at my favorite clean tone on each one with this Strat, and then I'm going to be kicking in a pedal. But before we get into that pedal, and before I tell you what this guitar is exactly, let's have a little listen to a few seconds on each of the 12 amps played clean. So this is my MB Guitars Strat. It's an early 60s style Strat with a rosewood fretboard, a gorgeous relic job and burst, which really reminds me of a 63 Strat that I used to own. And I've been getting more and more into this guitar recently, especially since I put in these Sunbear custom Alnico 5 pickups. Now, they're really fat and juicy, but also got so much clarity. And the only thing I don't like about them is the RWRP on the two in-between settings, which they come stock like that, but Stuart will do them without that if you want, and I think I might have to get them changed. But they do sound absolutely great and very stratty. Okay, before I group the amps up into groups like in those last few videos like this, I thought it'd be cool to play some chords, well, one chord in a sort of funky pattern on each of the 5 pickup selections on each amp. So I've put them in a completely random order, but it's just going to start giving you more of an idea of what each amp is doing. And then when I group them up after that, I will start to show you like what settings I used and why. And yeah, let's have a listen. So I thought that was quite enlightening actually, and really all of these amps did a good job of showing, you know, all the different positions of the guitar, but some of them I think probably just cover the whole spectrum in a way that's more appealing than others. But as we group them together and start to listen, we'll talk more about which amps I prefer over others for this sort of cleaner-ish Strat sound. Right, the first grouping I want to do is an interesting one, I think. It's the Magnatone Twilighter. It is the Bartel Starwood, and it's the vintage 1967 Super Reverb. Now the Super Reverb you're going to hear again in a couple of other groupings, but there's a reason I want to put it in this one. So I think this is the group of the most glassy sounding amps. Now the 67 Super Reverb, if you've been following the channel, you'll know I've had some issues with it. It's an old amp. It's not doing great in its own cabinet. So it's plugged into the 2x12, same as the couple of 2 rocks will be. Now on the amp, you'll also notice the bright switch is up, but otherwise the EQ is quite flat. And I've set the volume so it's at that nice sweet level. It's not going too hard. The Magnatone is probably the easiest amp to set out of all the amps here. Literally volume, treble bass, reverb. And as some of you noted from the last time I used this, it's just got an incredible amount of clarity. Now this might be my favorite amp of the day for this cleaner Strat sound. It's an amp I'd toyed with selling in the past, and I just don't think I should, because it's an incredibly hi-fi. I hate using the word hi-fi with amps. I've mentioned that before. I don't think it fits well. But as far as that goes, I think this is one of the more hi-fi sounding because it's the only way I can explain it. It's got so much clarity and it just sort of has a 3D feeling in the room. Now the Starwood, again, if you watch my recent video on that, it's more complicated to set. But for today, being that I wanted to do a clean Strat, you know, I love black face sounds for that. So I've set it in its most black face setting. Now that means it's really scooped and really glassy, which I think is really clever in an amp that's essentially a tweed amp that can do a few other settings to get all of the sort of thicker, warmer tweediness out of it by changing the EQ and making it into a really scooped and glassy blackface sounding amp is impressive in itself. I really enjoy the sound. Now I think either by putting the channel volume, so gain, up a little bit, or changing the EQ a bit, I could have made it a bit less scooped, which I might prefer, because when you hear it next to the Super and the Magnatone, it can sound a little bit too wiry. But yeah, let's see what you think. So I really loved all of those. Probably the three favourite for this sort of thing out of all these amps today. Well, maybe with some of what I'm going to look at next. Going in a different direction completely, and we're going down the Marshall route. Well, Bassman Marshall route, plus one other. So this one is going to be interesting. We're going to start with the 59 Bassman, which is in its own 4x10 cab. This is a brute of an amp. I've had people ask me before, why is the bass set to 0? What's wrong with you? This was a bass amp originally. And the previous owner, when he gave it to me, said, you know, with this particular exact amp, the bass really needs to be on 0. And he's right. Put it much higher than that and you're going to blow the room apart. Whereas when I borrowed the 1960 Bassman off of Sweet Amps, the shop in London, that one you could put the bass a couple of notches up and it would still sound good. This one, it just overtakes everything. So the bass is on 0. I turn the mids down a little bit, push the trebles up, and I'm using the bright channel but jumping the other two, a bit like I will be on the JTM45. Now the JTM45, I've pushed the treble, the presence pretty much all the way up. The mids are almost I guess they're around 3/4 of the way up. The bass is about 1/4 of the way up. Again, it's an amp with a lot of bass. And then I'm using the bright channel, jumped with the other channel, which is adding a little bit of extra something. Now, this is where I blur the lines of clean and not clean, but for me, the Marshall type amps, I really like them when they're just past clean, because otherwise they're a bit, I don't know, maybe more sterile to me, this particular amp. You need to just push it a bit. I'm using a reverb pedal with the JTM45. I'll also using it with the Bassman and the Royalist, which I'm going to mention next, and the other amp, the Dr. Z Z80, which is the only one that has an effects loop, so that will be in the effects loop. The reverb pedal is the Topanga by Catalin Bread, my favourite spring reverb pedal. And previously people had said, why don't you just add a bit of reverb to the non-reverb amps? And yeah, fair enough, because I probably would never play anything without a little touch of reverb. So the next amp, the Royalist, is in its JTM45 setting, because it has 3 different voicings. And again, it's not 100% clean, and it's interesting to hear it compared to the real JTM45. And we'll talk about it once you've heard it. And then lastly, the Dr. Z Z80, which is a really cool amp with a bit of history. And there's a video coming out that I've already made, which will come out on New Year's Day, about that amp with some different guitars playing through it. So you'll hear all about it then. I won't give you too much detail now. Apart from that, it's an EL34 amp, and it fits in this category quite well, but it is quite different from the others, being that it was based on originally a Vox amp. Okay, let's hear them. next we've got the 3 2-rock amps that I've got here at the moment. 2 of them are on loan from Chord, that's the vintage Deluxe and the Studio Signature. And then I've got my own 2-rock classic Reverb Signature. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail again with these 3 because I'm doing a video where I'm comparing the 3 of them together really soon before I have to give the 2 of them back. What I would say is the vintage Deluxe clearly shows itself to be very different. Now, we can argue about what a clean tone is exactly, and I could have gone cleaner on the vintage Deluxe, but I wanted to show you what sound I would use it for in a clean-ish setting, because if you know me and my channel, you know I normally play hotter than this. And the vintage Deluxe has got that sort of more mid syrupy, dumbly harmonic character, so I wanted to show that off. So the gain is about halfway up, I think. The other 2 are much more in the blackface Fender category, and you can actually set the Studio Signature and the Classic Signature to sound pretty much the same. That doesn't mean they sound the same over their whole range of themselves. They really don't, and they don't feel the same to play. But we'll talk about that more in the video about them. For this one, I actually set them so they sounded similar, you know? If anything, there's a bit more gain in the Studio Signature in this because they're playing at a similar volume to each other. So being that the Studio Signature is a 35 watt and the Classic Reverb is 100 watt, you know, you're going to hear a bit more gain in the Studio Signature. But they both, yeah, they do the same job for this purpose, right? That's all I need to say about that for now. Let's hear what they sound like. So look, the vintage Deluxe for this clean Strat thing is not what I would choose at all. But I could see how it would actually be really useful for some types of music, you know, having all of that sort of mid-range to it and that syrupiness. So I could see where that's going. I prefer the other 2. I prefer playing the Classic Reverb. It's, to me, nicer to play it this, the way they're set now. The way I like the Studio Signature is to put the gain up to like almost all the way up and then use the master as you will. And then it does have a nicer, bluesier sound to it than it does now. The Classic Reverb has more sounds in it generally, but we're going to come back to that in that other video. And you'll hear more of them when we kick the pedal in later. Okay, so now what I want to do is we've still got the Victoria Silver Sonic, and I want to compare that to the 59 Bassman because they're both tweeds. And then we've got the Tone Master Super Reverb, and I of course want to compare that to the old Super Reverb. So let's hear both of those different sets and then we'll talk about them. So actually I'm going to start by talking about the Tone Master and the vintage Super Reverb. It's like you can imagine how a robot would copy a human when they're pretty good at copying a human. It's close, but a bit not the same. Like you can get them to sound pretty similar, but there's always going to be a warmer, better sound out of the actual Super Reverb. The feeling's going to be nicer. It can be a bit brittle. I've set them exactly the same, right? Bright, switch, same EQ, everything. And I'm happy playing the Tone Master. I play it quite often because I keep it in my living room because it's got the power attenuation sort of power scaling thing. You can play it quietly. And I've got used to it and I quite like it. But when you play them at the same time, you can feel a big difference under the fingers. Much more brittle, less sort of feedback to you and what you're doing. But ultimately, I'm still always impressed by the Tone Master and what it does and how usable it is and how useful it is. It will be, when we kick in a pedal later, you will see why they're not yet at the level of an actual valve amp. Now the Bassman and the Victoria, they're quite different amps really. Like the Victoria Silversonic is based on the same chassis as a Bassman with the mid control and everything. But the Victoria is really sweet, and obviously being a smaller amp, half the power or so, you know, you're going to get more juice out of it at this sort of volume levels. I forgot to take the clip of the decibel meter with that, so actually in a second I'll show you. I then just did a 30-second clip with the decibel meter of the Victoria, so I'll show you that as well, so you can see what volume levels we were at. I really like the Victoria amp. I'm not sure I'll be keeping it. Again, it's on loan from Coda, as is the Bartel, but I'm more likely to be buying that one. The Victoria, why wouldn't I buy that? Probably because I've got so many amps. If I didn't, that's a great one amp for someone who really likes the older tweed sounds but wants it with a slightly modern twist to it, I think. It's not like a replica of an old amp. It feels like its own thing. It's a bit juicier, a bit bouncier to play. It sounds, yeah, it just sounds lovely. It does. Maybe not at its best with a Strat. Like I find tweeds, I really like them with Telecasters, with Les Pauls and things. But yeah, it's cool. Right. So I hope that's been interesting so far, right? And at the end of the video, I will put some more clips up of whatever's left over, like I have done in the last few videos. But now I want to talk about something really, really cool that, well, the pedal we're going to be kicking in, but this is no normal pedal. Okay, it's Christmas, of course, and one of my closest friends sent me an amazing gift. So Stuart from Sunbear, who you hear me mention a lot on the channel. We're really close friends in real life. And yeah, he had this commissioned for me. You're going to see some close-ups. This is an amazing thing. Okay, so it's a guitar pedal. It's a Rangemaster type of pedal made by Hello Sailor Effects. And there's a gold-plated little badge of his on here. But this whole thing is just something completely ridiculously amazing. So this was part of a shell, like a artillery shell, fired from HMS Kent when they were doing testing. And the shell has been cut and made into the enclosure for a pedal, which then has really beautiful parts in it. And also another really cool thing is the nut or the spacer or whatever you call this bit here. I'll show you again a close-up of in the center screw is from a Rolls-Royce engine, and is just another really cool thing. This whole thing is brilliant. Now, I'd never played a Rangemaster style pedal. I think it's in the fuzz family, we would say. This has a couple of different transistor options. I'll tell you which one I'm in a second. But what I've done is I played this through every amp with the guitar, obviously. And a bit like the first half of the video, we're going to hear everything compared with this. Now, most of the time I put it on and then I roll it back a bit. It's got one of the best cleanups I've ever heard. It's just a fantastic sounding pedal. When you whack it all the way up, you get really smooth, overdriven-y fuzz sound. When you pull it back, you get really beautiful, sort of glassier, thick and juicy though tones. It's something special. Let's start off. I'm going to find, out of all my clips, I want to find the one I think sounds best. I want to hear that first, and then we'll start talking about how the amps cope with a pedal like this. So I'm using the Germanium transistor throughout the whole of this video when using the pedal. And what I absolutely love about this is, I mean, okay, you can see how much it increases the volume. The day I recorded this, I'd only received the pedal that day. So, you know, I just put on a setting that I like the sound of and just had some fun with it. So it's pretty loud. That's why I couldn't call this video, you know, a gigging volume one. But what I love about it is when you crank it up, it absolutely goes for a very coloured sound. Now, people like Rory Gallagher and Brian May are famous for using Rangemasters, and it gives a particular sound. Now, I might not be using it in the right context or with the right guitar and amp combos, but it's interesting to hear what it does with each amp. Most of the time when you hear the clips, I'll play something where it's, you know, the guitar's wound up full, and then something where it's rolled back. So you'll hear the difference. And the first clip you'll hear is the Bartel Starwood, where you'll really hear how much it cleans back to this glassy, amazing thing. And the Germanium transistor on this particular pedal and the way this pedal works, you know, don't really know what a Rangemaster does per se. It's got to be the best clean up glassy sound I've ever got out of any fuzz pedal, to be honest. It just goes back to the amp and the guitar, but with a bit more glassiness and a bit more fullness, and it just sounds beautiful to me. Now what I'm going to do is just play all the amps one after the other without talking. You can just enjoy hearing how the amps, you know, you've heard them all clean. Now you can hear them just in a random order, what they do with this pedal. You know, the pedal's got quite a lot of, it's not a transparent pedal, let's put it like that. This is a bit of a throwback, a Rangemaster. It's not something you see many people using these days. So it's an interesting thing to see how each of these amps sort of changes with it. But yeah, I'm gonna leave you at this point and just play out with the clips. Because ultimately I would be saying a similar thing for each of them. You know, with the pedal on, it just felt really good fun to play. You know, it's not something I would use all the time, but especially for that rolled back sound, for recording, if I wanted that big stratty glassy sound, any of these amps can do it with this pedal rolled back, and I think that's fantastic. And rolled on, look, it's probably not a sound I'd use with a Strat. It's a little bit nasal for me, but I haven't played around with it enough to really have dialed it in. But I can imagine in some contexts this would be great, and I can't wait to use this pedal in other videos when we look at other things. But anyway, I actually recorded most of this video about a week ago. We're now a few days after Christmas, and yeah, it was a hell of a Christmas. I hope you had a good one too. I've probably eaten and drunk too much. I'm a little bit tired, and so I just wanted to get this video together. These videos are a mammoth editing task. They take me several days, and so if I've made any mistakes, let me know, and also just let me know what guitar you'd like me to use in the next one of these, maybe a Les Paul or a semi-hollow, you know, humbucker guitar, or an SG, Telecaster, you know, let me know. But I hope you enjoyed this one, and, you know, using this pedal that was a gift to me, it was all a bit of fun really for me, and just something that fits the season. So anyway, you'll next see a video from me on New Year's Day, which is about the Dr. ZZ80. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this one and enjoy the rest of the year. And I wish you a Happy New Year for when that starts, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.